Though David advised me that I could talk on any subject at all, I've decided to spare you and not to give in to the temptation to launch into a detailed, in-the-weeds discussion of the current political struggle over the new proposed NHPRC grant guidelines. Instead, I want to take you back 225 years ago this week, when the first federal Congress finally achieved a quorum and settled down to do the precedent-setting and difficult work of fleshing out the new federal government outlined in the Constitution and addressing the difficult issues that had bedeviled the Confederation Congress. A warning should be provided here for some of you. I see people who were there when I gave a talk 2 days ago, and some of this is going to be repetitive. So if you do want to slip out and, spend a little time in the hallway, come back later, it's okay. So despite the fact that our current Congress very often, too often I think, seems more than a little dysfunctional, as historians, we still should find it quite amazing that this bicameral elected legislature has reached the milestone of 225 years, an accomplishment unparalleled in the history of democracies. Our Constitution and the governmental structure that it created has weathered crisis, adapted to change, and stood the test of time. And the United States Congress is at the heart of that enduring structure. The founders saw the legislature as the first branch of government, and its duties and powers are much more clearly and extensively defined in the Constitution than those of the other two branches. It was up to Congress to do the real work of fleshing out the government structure outlined in the Constitution and ensuring that the new federal institutions met the needs of the nation. I promised to get back to the substance of my talk with dispatch, but given this audience, I can't resist providing a little background on the First Federal Congress project and the documentary history of the First Federal Congress, or FFCP and DHFFC in our code. The edition has 3 series, 8 volumes of official records. Those include the journals, the Senate Legislative, the Senate Executive, the related documents in the Executive Journal, the House Journal, 3 volumes of legislative histories, and then 2 volumes of all the myriad petitions submitted to the first Congress, and also a section on all the rules and other procedures of the Congress. 20 volumes of the DHFFC have been published by the Johns Hopkins University Press. Volume 21 is at the press, and the final volume will be submitted this year. The project is sponsored and partially funded by the George Washington University and has received support from some of my favorite government agencies, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and some private foundations, most notably the William Nelson Cromwell Foundation. We editors at the FFCP have had the amazing good fortune to work for a project launched in the era of what became known as comprehensive editions. Our mission is to locate, collect, edit, and publish, or use in some way, every surviving official or unofficial document that relates to the history of what we believe was the most important and productive Congress in United States history. I find it almost incredible that so many original documents, particularly the personal letters to and from the members, have survived and are still available in archives and manuscript collections across this country. A recent, thorough, final search using WorldCat and Archives Grid turned up over 40 letters written to or from members of the FFC that we were previously unaware of. Some of them deposited in public institutions since our last final search. In recent years, we've increased our efforts to build relationships with private collectors and manuscript dealers who hold or know of a fair number of original FFC letters. Several of them have become friends of the project, most notably after we helped North Carolina recover their original of the Bill of Rights. That got a lot of notice from collectors and people who sell manuscripts. So they have been helping us try to find anything that might still be out there that we haven't found. The official records, now I'm going to skip from the First Federal Congress project, that's enough of that, and go on to the meat of this talk, talking about the records of the First Congress and what they revealed to us. First, people that work in Senate records should be so proud because the records reveal that Samuel A. Otis, the longtime Continental Congress, and like longtime Continental Congress Secretary Charles Thompson before him, seems to have preserved every single scrap of paper. And the scraps saved by those early archivists are often gems. One only needs to look at the original Senate draft of the Judiciary Act of 1789 to understand how valuable the retention of these records was to reconstructing the legislative history. For example, we can tell that a grand committee, the grand committee, the members were one from each state, appointed a subcommittee to draft the bill. How can we tell that? Because the bill has got 3 different handwritings in it. The people those days, they had to write these things out by hand. It's hard to imagine today. And also we can tell from the handwriting again that they took on different parts of the bill. One dealt with structure, one dealt with jurisdiction, and one dealt with procedures. We can tell who those people were besides. Handwriting on the draft revealed that which senators were on the subcommittee and what their topics were. If the first clerk of the House, John Beckley, who I never say very many good words about, although we probably are through more quickly than we would have been if John Beckley had been a good archivist. But Beckley's habit was to, if he had a later copy of something, I mean, we can pretty much prove this. If he had a later copy of something, he didn't need to keep the earlier copy. So with the House records, you can't document the process. You have to do what you can using printed versions, and there's this lucky happenstance that one of the original drafts of a House bill ends up in Senate records. And that really is useful, but the House is where most of the legislation was started, and House records are very pathetic. Anyway, going back to the Senate, for this talk I drew on several volumes of the DHFFC, including the Senate Executive Journal and volumes covering the correspondence of that Congress's first session. Volume 9, The Diary of William Clay and Notes of Other Senators, which presents an annotated edition of one of the most important political documents in American history, is an essential resource for the First Senate, which met in secret, both as legislative and as executive sessions. You'll hear more about and from that diary later. It's because of those published volumes and a couple of volumes of the presidential series of the Papers of George Washington that I was able quite easily to pull together all the existing official and unofficial evidence for this talk. I'll use that documentary evidence to tell the stories of the rocky start of the constitutionally established advice and consent relationship between the Senate and George Washington and the precedents that were established during those early days. Currently, when the U.S. Senate is considering a potentially controversial presidential nomination for a federal office requiring its advice and consent, we'll often hear a news report that mentions the tradition of senatorial courtesy as dating back to 1789. The name that comes immediately to my mind when I hear one of these reports is Benjamin Fishburne. Though the senators present during the executive session of August 5th, 1789, couldn't have realized its long-term importance, their rejection of President George Washington's nomination of Fishburne to be the naval officer at Savannah, Georgia, set an enduring precedent. The story of Fishburne's nomination and the reaction to it illustrates how the puzzle pieces of the official records and the unofficial records can be pieced together to understand this important precedent-setting moment in Senate executive relations.